Did Muhammad exist? A huge controversy has arisen over this question just in recent weeks, and many people think that the whole idea is either trivial or absurd. And yet there are enough strange aspects of the question that I myself have written 2 books about the subject. My dear friend Ibn Warraq has written even more than that. Recently he appeared on Winston Marshall's show, and he said this about the issue.
All our knowledge of the lives of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, are based on literary evidence, which some of it dates more than 300 years after his supposed death. So there are no surviving extant, documents which are contemporaneous with Muhammad,
including the Quran.
Including the Quran.
In another part of the interview, Winston Marshall asks Ibn Warraq about Ed Hussein, who is an Islamic apologist in the UK and who dismissed questions about pedophilia in Islam emanating from Muhammad's example in his marriage to Aisha, who he consummated his marriage with or raped when he was 54 and she was 9, according to the Islamic sources. Hussein dismissed all this by saying, well, those sources are late. And Ibn Warraq said this.
Our knowledge of all the his wives, what he did, and so on, are contained in the Hadith. The Hadith were written over 300 years after his death. So how can... But see, somebody like Hussein will argue about the details of his life, but when it becomes inconvenient, he will bring up the idea of lateness of the sources. But if they're late for everything. I mean, not a single aspect of his life is authentic.
So this has become a massive controversy quite recently, even though the question has been around for years. And there have been numerous debates and videos about various aspects of the issue. You may have seen some of them. One unfortunate aspect of this is that there is a growing tendency among some people to treat the entire question with scorn and ridicule, acting as if it's a crazy idea that emanates from one person who's going off half-cocked, characterizing those who believe in it as a cult, belittling them with nicknames that are meant to mock the whole idea and mock the people who raised it, and the like. Now, this is a shame, because it is a legitimate question and an important one. One curious aspect of these controversies has been the charge that even to suggest that Muhammad may not have existed is detrimental for Christians who were in discussion with Muslims, as it undermines the moral critique of Muhammad's life. Now, there's no reason why this has to be true. Muslims believe in and imitate Muhammad as he's depicted in the Islamic sources, and so the moral critique is valid and necessary. The question of whether those sources have any historical value, however, is a separate one, and likewise valid. Some say it's counterproductive for Christian apologetics, but there's no reason why that needs to be so either. And also, the validity of any line of inquiry is not actually based on how useful the line of inquiry is for one purpose or another. It's based on to what extent the question illuminates the truth, and let the chips fall where they may. So, discussions of the historicity of Muhammad and the origins of Islam are valid and necessary. They do not emanate from a cult. They are not the province of one man's imagination, and they are neither silly nor stupid. What is counterproductive and unnecessary in the all-too-human temptation to read people out of this or that group of the movement based on their views on this issue is that the evidence for the historicity of Muhammad is just about as strong or weak, depending on your point of view, as the evidence against. And so people of goodwill can and do disagree about the value of that evidence. Now, beware of the temptation to think that you know all about an issue or have heard all the arguments involved in justifying a particular point of view because you've watched a few videos or debates. It is simply not possible to present all the arguments for or against Muhammad's existence in a video or debate or even a series thereof. Consider the difference between a book and a movie. A book is going to have more detail, more nuance, more explanation, more subplots, more character development, and more, unless the book itself comes after the movie and is a novelization of the movie. If you really want to know a story well that exists in both forms, you can't just watch the movie. Also, the question of who won a debate is not the same as the question of whether the argument on one side or another is stronger. Someone might be a good debater, someone might be a bad debater, or someone might be having a good day or a bad day, or may not have marshaled all the strongest arguments in favor of a particular position. Debates, I find, generally, they might be entertaining, but they generate more heat than light. If you really want to know about the reasons for challenging Muhammad's historicity, you're going to have to find the information in books. Here are a few good ones. In the first place, you have the book Did Muhammad Exist? That I wrote in 2010 and then revised and expanded a few years ago. And that lays out the basic case and most of the principal reasons for why this is a legitimate and important question. Then I followed that up last year with a book called Muhammad, A Critical Biography, which is exactly that, a critical evaluation of the accounts of Muhammad's life from the earliest Islamic sources, evaluating them from a historical standpoint and questioning their historical reliability on the basis of largely internal evidence, contradictions with other versions of the story, and the like. But of course, I am by no means the only person who has written books about this issue. One excellent book on it is Crossroads to Islam, The Origins of the Arab Religion and the Arab State by Yehuda Nevo and Judith Corin. Another is the groundbreaking work that many have dismissed without due consideration, Christoph Luxemburg's The Syro-Aramaic Reading of the Quran. Luxemburg notes that the earliest manuscripts of the Quran contain no diacritical marks. If you're familiar with the Arabic alphabet, you know that many of the letters are identical one to another. Letters have another letter that looks just like it, except for the dots that are above and below it. And the only way you can tell whether it's one letter or another is by those diacritical marks. So Luxemburg noted that since the earliest extant Qur'ans manuscripts have no diacritical marks at all, that there's actually quite a lot of variability in what the text is actually saying. And he contends that there's an Aramaic substratum to quite a lot of it. People who put a great value in the fact that there are early extant Quran manuscripts are often not only exaggerating the age of those manuscripts, but also overestimating the importance of them as actual Quranic manuscripts. To have a fragment of the Quran that purports to be from the middle of the 7th century is not the same as having a copy of the standardized edition from today, which was only standardized in the early 20th century. With lack of the diacritical marks creates quite a lot of variability, and Luxemburg's book is quite complicated but well worth the effort. Also, Gunter Lühling, A Challenge to Islam for Reformation, where he also finds various textual substrata within the Quran in passages that are obscure, scrambled, odd, ambiguous, and he looks at the text in a different way, noting the absence of the diacritical marks and coming up with some quite compelling readings. Then there is Ibn Warraq, who we saw a few moments ago, and he's written many important books on this. The Origins of the Quran, The Quest for the historical Muhammad. These are, and these others are essay collections from some of the great pioneering scholars of this issue. You might be interested to know that there were scholars who were working in this area in the 19th and 20th century. Got very little attention for it, but nonetheless, this is, as I say, not something invented by some YouTuber that you may not like because he said something wrong one day. Christmas in the Quran is another one from Ibn Wara, quite lengthy, but a fascinating inquiry. The title refers to an essay within it that shows, I think, definitively that the latter part of Surah 5 in the Quran was originally a reference to Christmas and to the Eucharist. And so you can check that out. And then there's my own book, The Critical Quran, which takes many of these findings and puts them in the particular context of the passages themselves in a new and clear translation. So in any case, if you see one video or a couple of videos and you think this whole idea is now stupid and to be ridiculed and rejected, it seems clear that very many people who are preeminent scholars in this field, and by no means to be rejected out of hand, have taken it quite a bit more seriously. And that might be something worth bearing in mind. Another point, some people say that the long gap between the time that Muhammad supposedly lived and the sources about his life is simply something standard in history, and that there are similar long gaps involved in the lives of numerous important figures in history. This is actually false. One of these people who is often invoked in this regard is Alexander the Great, because there's a similarity between him and Muhammad. Not just that they were both warriors who led armies, according to the sources, but that Alexander the Great, the lives and the stories about him, they generally come from about 200 years after his death and the period thereafter. And so that's pretty much the same as in the case of Muhammad. In fact, remarkably similar. In Alexander's case, however, and very much unlike the situation of Muhammad, there are numerous inscriptions mentioning him during his lifetime. In 330 BC, which is 7 years before he died, in the city of Priene, there's an inscription commemorating Alexander's dedication of the temple of Athena Polias in that city. And it says very simply, King Alexander dedicated this temple to Athena Polias. Unlike the sparse mentions of Muhammad that date from the first 60 years after his supposed date of death, neither this inscription nor any of the others about Alexander that date from during his lifetime get key details of his life drastically wrong, whereas all the accounts that we have of Muhammad from the 7th century do not correspond to the standard Islamic story about what he said and did. So you gotta, nobody got it right, nobody even got close, you gotta wonder. Take also Julius Caesar. We have his own commentaries on the Gallic War and on the Civil War in the Roman Republic and then Empire. We also have accounts of him from his contemporaries, Marcus Tullius Cicero and Sallust. For Muhammad, we have none of his writings and no accounts from any of his contemporaries except for material that first appears in 9th century documents. And so that's 200 years after his death, and there we are again. Some people will say, well, we do have the Quran, but the Quran actually does not give us any details about the life of Muhammad. It doesn't even mention him, aside from 4 mentions, none of which have any biographical data in them. And the many references to the messenger and to the prophet, they don't contain any biographical information either. And so you can find discussion of that once again in the critical Quran. So I would say beware of the temptation to get stampeded here and to think that you know all about an issue because of a few debates that you may have seen. Next time that you're tempted to watch a video about one side or another of the Muhammad controversy, enjoy the video. But after that, pick up a book and read about this issue I can tell you from personal experience, it's fascinating, and the study of it is richly rewarding. You will not regret the time that you spend on it. Thank you.